Rachel, in practice over the years, we always really categorize fertility or infertility in three categories. We would say there could be a female factor, whether it's lack of ovulation, a hormone imbalance, or something structural going on. We talked about male factor with difficulties with sperm quality, quantity, and the like. And then, of course, there was the big black box. 1/3 of couples having trouble getting pregnant turned out to be really undiagnosed and unexplained. And this is incredibly frustrating and emotionally frustrating for my patients, for sure. I think when we speak to Eran today, we're going to learn just how far we've come in a way to assist, particularly in that unexplained category, to help couples or individuals with their fertility.
One of the things that I found along those lines so interesting is, we talk about in so many of these situations and health challenges that women face that it's so multifaceted. So there's emotional, there's financial, there's physical. But what's really interesting talking to Eran, who founded his company in Israel, is there's still emotional and physical, but there is not the same financial burden because the state of Israel pays for quite a number of cycles. So I think it's just really interesting to keep that in mind, depending on where you are in the world, that the level of pain of certain of those factors could be different. But, this was like a masterclass in genetics, which I clearly could have used some more time in college, but he's really deep in the science. He's really careful about what you can say and you can't say because you don't want to make any scientific claims that are not validated. And I just think it's a really interesting way to see where the science could ultimately be taking us. So take a listen.
Without question. One last thing to bring up that I'm happy about, AI is going to help clinicians with managing fertility for people, but not replace them. So I don't think we'll be out of a job anytime soon.
Which is really interesting because that's a theme that comes up a lot. We want to, with so many of these direct-to-consumer digital health, we want to put some of the power or a lot of the power in the hands of the patient. But at least in the context of our conversations and the work that you do day in and day out, that is never meant to say, get rid of the physician altogether. The physician still plays an important role in so many of these areas.
Welcome to the Business of the V. Hello, friends and colleagues. I'm Dr. Alyssa Dweck.
And I'm Rachel Braun Scherl. Each week, we bring you the most fascinating investors, inventors, entrepreneurs, academics, and healthcare practitioners who are making things happen in women's sexual and reproductive health.
If you are a woman, know a woman, have a business, or care about your V health and wellness, fasten your seatbelts and listen in to another informative and inspiring episode.
We are so thrilled to welcome our guest today, Eran Eshed, who is the co-founder and CEO of Fertility. We're excited. We're talking to you live from Tel Aviv this morning, our morning, your afternoon. So thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, the excitement is mine. Thank you for having me.
So let's just jump right in and talk about fertility, how you got there, how you decided this was a need, and really what it is. Because I know, for both of us, Alyssa and myself, there's a lot of activity, much exciting activity in this space. And we're really interested to know, what piece of the land that you're particularly focused on.
So like many things in life, this was not intended. It happened by chance that I met my two co-founders, one of which is a fertility specialist, a doctor, and the head of the Hadassah Ein Karem Fertility Center here, one of the largest and best ones, and the CTO who was doing his PhD work on embryo assessment. I've been in the technology space for over 25 years, and I've done, many things from semiconductors to, embedded software. I actually even did artificial intelligence in automotive, and when I met them again, by chance, I was just blown away with the prospects of how we could apply this to something that is, I want to say, better and more compassionate than e-commerce or fintech or crypto, because they all used in many cases the same technology fundamentals. But in this case, just the idea of how we could help people, women, to become parents with something like AI was just flabbergasting to me. So that's how it started.
Well, we often laugh when we hear people say, how'd you go from Microsoft to menopause? How do you go to automotive to AI for fertility? So it's really great to have you. I'm going to turn it over to Alyssa and say, obviously you see fewer patients right now at this point in the practice who are trying to get pregnant because the majority of your patient population is older. But how frustrating has it been as a practitioner to not have more solutions, or to not have, I mean, we've made a lot of progress. I don't mean to suggest that we haven't. How does this fit into the, the conversations that you found yourself having with patients?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, this is top of mind for so many of my patients who either are pre-pregnancy or maybe have been focusing on their professional lives and they want to freeze their eggs. So the conversation for that type of assistance in fertility really starts as young as age 30 or 32, which was unheard of when I started in practice. So I think that is something that's really top of mind for so many of my younger end patients. I'm curious if that's a similar conversation that's going on in Israel, or if it differs from the US. And if so, is cryopreservation part of your assessment and your expertise in the company?
So first of all, the answers to pretty much everything you asked is yes. But I think the differences between the Israeli fertility market and everywhere else, specifically the US, is a conversation for a full podcast.
At least one.
Right.
Sorry about
it's
that.
a big, no, it's actually quite interesting. I mean, Israel is an anomaly in this case for various reasons. Treatments are basically 100% subsidized by the government, which has its own objectives. So you can have, I don't remember the number, but you could have up to 6 children, and you're allowed to continue until you have children of both sexes. It's quite amazing. So when you compare this to the US, it's like a completely different opera. But definitely on a global scale, and our services are provided in many countries, soon in the US, but many countries in Europe and Asia Pacific, Middle East. So we're exposed to a lot of the data. We see the age distributions. We see many parameters that pertain to being able to understand the dynamics behind, what is happening, why are people doing this, and what ages and so on. So definitely there's a trend towards becoming parents later. Again, many different reasons for that, which lends itself to a lot of egg freezing, which happens actually in ages that are even younger than what you mentioned, right?
Yeah.
Mid-20s. So we try to address many of the unmet needs in these markets, and to us, and this has nothing to do with fertility or with fertility. It has to do with a general concept of, when do you decide that you want to invest your time and money and investors' money in a certain endeavor, is when you check 3 boxes. And you have to check all of them. One is that there's a real unmet need. 2 is that you're able to do something about it, mitigate it, solve it, improve the current standard of care, or whatever that may be. And the third is you can make money, that there's unit
course.
economics and there's a business model behind it. And in this case, there's just so many unmet needs that it actually makes it even difficult to decide where you want to focus.
Yeah, I love this mission and the way you organized it in those three steps. So, I'm thinking that the younger people who have indication to have need for this would be those with, some sort of hormonal issue, perhaps polycystic ovarian syndrome, those who are, from a women's standpoint anyway, or women's health standpoint, who are, dealing with age-related issues and fertility. And then, of course, male issues. Can you take us very briefly through the journey of the person who wants to get involved as a patient? Is that something you can take us through?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, I think it does vary from country to country. The way people choose their journey, the way they select, which physician to turn to, the way they're referred through that, whether it's through, just searching the web, or whether it's a word of mouth, or they were referred to by their OBGYN. But once they do choose what clinic and what physician they want to go to after having established, that there is a problem, then start a journey, which, I'm sure you both are very familiar with, but it's a long journey. It's complex. It's expensive in most countries. It takes a huge emotional and physiological toll. And it involves many different touch points for the patient with a clinic, with a physician, with a lab, in which there's very little transparency. That's one of the issues when we mention an unmet need. It's not just about how do we, improve the decision-making process, which is something I'm sure we'll talk about in a moment, because there's many decision-making junctures, along the journey, which are not done in a very effective way today. But even just the engagement level, right? The transparency that patients have. So, they would start with the consultation, in which they'd been told, listen, you're this age, you have that BMI and this AMH and AFC levels. Let's try with this. Let's try this protocol. Take this drug. Let's give it a try and see what happens, and adjust as we go. And we know how poorly that works, because sometimes you understimulate, sometimes you overstimulate, and there's so much research around. Does a higher dose of drugs produce more eggs, and is more eggs better than maybe slightly less eggs but of higher quality? And then so you start with that, and then there's the retrieval in the embryo. The fertilization and the embryo culture, which is one of the most, I would say, areas that people just don't know what's going on there in that back room. Sometimes they would get a call from, the nurse practitioner, from the lab staff, and they tell them something that they have to Google and, try to figure out what that means. The healthcare professionals themselves, the embryologists, don't really know. They have very rudimentary ways of assessing quality and potential. So they don't know much. Patients know much less. At the end of that 5-7 day period, some selection is made, a fresh transfer, a frozen transfer, whatever the case may be. But again, you're in the dark. You're just hoping. Level of anxiety are very, very high. You're hoping, and once something fails, there's very little explanation that you're given on why, because they simply don't know. So this is where, we get in, and the mission is first and foremost to improve the process, to improve decision-making, make it data-based and data science-based, and we apply very advanced AI techniques to do that. which, translates into, shorter time to pregnancy, hopefully, and improved rates, but not less important, an experience for patients that want them to continue trying. Because if everything is successful, it's perfect.
Well, let's try to
but
break
if
it
not-
down for people who don't understand the process, or people who are in the space as investors or entrepreneurs, and really importantly, as patients and physicians. How does it work? How do you apply AI? What does the patient do that's different? What does the physician do that's different?
So it's not a single answer, because when you look at the IVF journey, there's, arguably 5, 6, 7 different paradigms in the process that can be automated and can be powered by, data and data science. And in each of them, it means something different. So I'll, just tell you a little about what we have today and where we are planning to go.
Yeah.
Where we are today is with an embryology assistant called Chloe. Okay, so Chloe is installed in embryology labs and connects to different sources of data in that lab, and most notably incubators that have optics in them. So
Can you describe, I was interested in reading about it, what Chloe actually, what the acronym stands for?
I'm embarrassed to say that I never remember.
That's okay.
Because we retrofitted the definition. The idea was, and this is part of when I said engagement and transparency, it's also a personal touch. This is not like an AI algorithm telling you something. It's an embryology assistant. It's like a Siri in a way, right? And embryologists interact with it, patients interact with it, and it's just like a human embryologist giving you information and insight. So Chloe analyzes images, videos, different clinical parameters from the EMR and EHR systems, and provides the embryologists with an ongoing assessment of the quality of the embryo, the developing embryo, throughout the process. So
I have one question for you, because again, I'm not a reproductive endocrinologist. I don't do IVF, but obviously have a lot of patients who have undergone this. Where does checking for genetics come into this process? So I understand that Chloe may help with egg selection, quality, using traditional lab parameters for patient choice and whatnot, like you mentioned, AMH, anti-Mullerian hormone, which is a typical test we do to check for quality of eggs in the moment, BMI, body mass index, because we know that people who have obesity may have a lower fertility rate. But where does PGD, or pre-genetic diagnosis, get replaced by AI? Does it check for any sort of genetic issues, or is it sheerly Chloe used to select the best eggs or embryos for successful pregnancy regardless?
That's a very good and interesting question, and it is very applicable to the process that happens in the US, because the US is very intense on genetic testing. Let's start with saying that genetic testing is controversial. It's not it's not a method that you would find broad consensus that actually, improves the selection process. But in many ways, it's the only way that exists today to, validate viability beyond just, looking at the image and saying, yeah, this looks like a pretty good embryo, it's symmetrical, and,
So just for the layman out there, just to distinguish, there's a big difference between looking for genetic mutations and designing a baby that has particular gender, hair color, eye color characteristics. Is that an accurate way to frame it? I mean, lots of people are already doing pre-screening for the health of their pregnancies and the viability of their pregnancies. So I think that genetic testing again, could be a whole nother podcast, but I think there's some nuance there that I would love you to
There's a big nuance. It's very different, but it also overlaps a lot. So essentially, when you look at genetic testing, the process is about biopsying, a few cells from the trophectoderm of the embryo, i.e. the cells that will become the placenta and not the actual embryo cells, and sequencing them and trying to find abnormalities, chromosomal abnormalities. Now, the reason the test is being criticized, aside, the fact that it's very expensive, is that, first of all, you're not biopsying the embryo, you're biopsying the placenta. And then we all know that genetic sequencing is a very noisy test. So when you amplify DNA, you get misreads from, a noisy amplification. The third thing is that it's clear that being euploid, i.e., having a symmetrical set of, chromosomes, 23 chromosomes, is necessary, but it doesn't mean that it's sufficient. Yeah. And then finally, it's researched and documented and published that embryos actually know how to correct some of these abnormalities. So it's essentially looking through a very narrow lens at something and saying, you know what, this is the only way we know how to check something that is indicative of quality. Let's apply this criteria, across the board. So there's many false negatives, many false positives, and in fact, again, published, researched, the accuracy of PGT-A in this case, or genetic sequencing for screening embryos, has an accuracy of roughly high 60s, maybe 70%. Okay, so clearly it's not enough. There's more out there. And then the question is, what can you do more, or instead of, or combine? And what we say, and this is something that we invest a lot of effort and energy in providing clinical validation, is that at the end of the day, this is about fusing different sources of data and different inputs. There's not one single technique that can tell you, what you need with 100% accuracy. There is no 100%, but we know 70 is not good enough. Can we take this to 75, 80, 90? This is where what Chloe does, which is based on morphology and morphokinetic analysis, i.e. images and the development of the embryo over time, and applying this through AI models, adds another layer of information that in many cases addresses these inaccuracies and improves the results.
So here's today's hot flash. We often quote that 1 in 8 couples has trouble with fertility. In actuality, this is a global issue, with an estimated 15% of couples having trouble conceiving globally. 48.5 million couples experience infertility. So I want to definitely get to the business side of things, but one last medical type of question. Here in the US anyway, reproductive endocrinology clinics or fertility clinics usually rely on publishing their rates, their pregnancy rates from IVF. Does Chloe have a rate yet? Is there anything that is comparable, or is this just not used in your neck of the woods?
So first of all, SART reporting, and in Europe, there's, HFEA, and or in the UK and other places, different systems. This is a very problematic outlet, because there's a lot of ways to count and report. So it's a problematic measure. I mean, it's the best you have today. Yeah. But it's problematic. Chloe, if you actually want to measure something for efficacy, it really requires prospective testing and usage of the system. I mean, the best thing would be a clinical randomized controlled clinical trial, but these things take years, especially in the case of fertility.
Yeah.
You know, now if you're looking for live birth rate, you have to wait 9 months. And just by looking at the inclusion and exclusion criteria, you're looking at, 3-4 years worth of a trial to get something that is statistically significant. So the real test is, how well did you do before Chloe and how well do you do after Chloe, which may not be necessarily, a clinically, a very rigorous, clinical measure of saying, here's the difference statistically, but it is a measure of quality of outputs. And since we just launched Chloe commercially about 6 months ago, at Eshed, in fact, last year. And since then, we signed up a few tens of customers who are using Chloe in clinical practice. So we anticipate that within, a year or so, we will have these clinics being able to report this is what happened before, this is what happened after. So that data does not exist today for Chloe or for any other system out there. These things take time.
Excellent. I felt that would be your answer, but I thought it was worth asking.
Yeah.
In terms of where Chloe is in the marketplace, help us understand, where it's in practice, how it's being used. Is it a specific number of clinics? Are you able to increase the capacity of the number of patients who can go through it? People who are struggling with infertility are often rabid researchers and would love to share some information about where this is. Is this an option? Do they have to fly to Israel? Do they have to be in the Middle East? How could someone find out about adding this, what sounds like a layer of assurance or increased probability of success to their fertility journey?
Yeah, so being a medical device or a software as a medical device company, we are very prudent with saying, we're going to improve your rates. Mm-hmm. You don't say these things. The evidence in, practice has to basically provide you with, so there's things you can and cannot say. Mm-hmm. And you won't find us saying, Chloe is going to improve your rates. But what Chloe does, actually, it has a value proposition to 3 main stakeholders. And then I'll get into where you can find it and what it means for you, the patient. But essentially, the first customer for Chloe is the embryology lab. So you're looking at embryologists that spend about, and again, we've done a lot of research on that area, up to 48% of their day-to-day job is administrative work, right? Mundane, specific administrative work that can be completely automated. There's no reason for a human to do this. So they become, like a Tesla autopilot, they sit behind the wheel, they supervise, they don't have to be actually driving the car. So everything is automated, they supervise it. So it saves a lot of time. It improves the attrition, right? It's a very tough job for embryologists, and you're able to achieve a lot more in the embryology lab. So research that we've done based on clinics that use Chloe, we see up to 30% reduction in embryology hours per cycle. And we see an increase of up to 50% in lab capacity. I'm talking about things like, let's even say you have the data, just, typing it into the EMR system. I mean, they write stuff on paper. Yeah. I was shocked to see. So information is written on paper and then typed into the EMR. Of course, many mistakes happen. So Chloe is always fresh. She's not tired. She's not annoyed. And she'll always give you the same answer because it's based on the same, analysis of the data. So embryology, above the decision-making and efficiency, Chloe provides a layer of, BI, business intelligence. So if you're a lab director, now from your smartphone, your from home, you can basically see everything that happens with the different, benches and workstations in your clinic. And if you're a network and you're a, scientific director or COO of a network and you have 20 clinics, you can see all of them on a single dashboard and understand, what works better or worse, get real-time alerts on, if something happens, you don't react a month after when you see FERT rates drop, you get a real-time alert so you can address it. So everything that has to do in the embryology lab. The second thing is the patient, the physician. One of the things, and Alyssa, although you're not in REI, I'm sure you can relate to this. One of the pain points of physicians is not being able to have an informative conversation with patients after the cycle has not been successful. Yeah. And unfortunately, we know the statistics. It's about 2.7 cycles in the US to get a baby in case it's successful. So, you're failing cycle by cycle.
Yep.
And why? So being able to have that conversation and say, yes, we did transfer a genetically viable embryo and it was not successful, but let me show you how that embryo developed and give you some insights, because it developed a little slower than what we expect. They don't know these things today. Now, it doesn't mean that the patient is necessarily, they're avid, but they're not reproductive, experts, but at least they get some explanation that they can go afterwards and read. And it does definitely reduce the, the level of anxiety, and it helps physicians manage that conversation, which today is one of these unmet needs that we mapped out. And the third one is the patient, which, now at any given moment through an app on a smartphone, just logs in and checks her embryos and sees, the assessments, gets educational material, doesn't have to wait for a text message or a phone call, on day 3. It's always there. It gives you some kind of peace of mind, which this is not scientific, but I think it just makes sense that when you're less anxious, you're more likely to be successful in such a treatment. So all these together is what are the benefits that Chloe brings. Now, of course, if you want to use Chloe, you have to be performing your treatment in a clinic that has Chloe. So today it's mostly in Europe. We have a CE mark that allows us to sell Chloe commercially. And in fact, you'll see this month already in some countries in Europe that the clinics themselves launch marketing campaigns that, position themselves as leaders in the market because they're using, cutting edge technology, AI, and it's like powered by Chloe. So it's their own brand powered by Chloe, with all the, tools that they use and can make accessible to patients.
Well, so let me just jump in there for a second. When someone sees that powered by Chloe, and I know there are things you will be able to say in the future that you're not able to say now, and increases rate, reduces preterm labor. I'm making these up to anybody who's listening, but you'll be able to measure them. What does it mean? What are you hoping it communicates when a clinic says powered by Chloe? What is the communication to the patient, implied, implicit, or explicit? What if you go into a clinic that's powered by Chloe, you can expect fill in the blank?
So it very much depends. Like always, different clinics have different ways to position themselves and the value and benefit that Chloe could, bring to patients. We actually work with them quite closely to tailor these messages under MLR, right? Marketing, legal, regulatory, frameworks that tell us exactly what we can and can't say. But essentially, if I have to, kind of dumb this down to one statement. When you're going to
Don't worry, I don't take it personally.
no, it's dumb it down in terms of trying to
Yeah.
find the common denominator, okay,
Yeah.
if you will. And again, Alyssa, I'm sure can relate to this. Once the doctor used to be God. I mean, the physician said so. There's a generational shift.
Yes.
That doesn't happen
Yes.
anymore, right?
100%.
So people read, people research, and they want information and they want answers. So from their perspective, when the physician, the doctor, says, we are equipping ourselves with the best technology out there to make your journey as successful as possible, as engaging and transparent as possible. And of course, research shows that X, Y, Z. And if you look at the fertility space, it is regulated, but you would be very surprised, I was, when you read, for example, the small print in the genetic test results. You're basically paying, I don't know, $2,500 to get your embryos genetically tested. And at the you get the results, which half of them, it says, these are inconclusive, we don't know.
Yeah.
And at the bottom, it says, oh, and by the way, it means nothing. We don't guarantee anything. Some research says this, some research says that. And at the end of the day, you're just looking to gain as much assurance. You want to try as many, tests and procedures to make sure you maximize your chances of success.
Yeah.
So for the patient, it basically means, the clinic, the physician that you trust, that you want to trust, takes their profession very seriously and uses everything, the best technology, the most advanced researched medical tools to try and make your treatment successful and more engaging. And that alone as a statement, I think, creates trust. You don't want to, put your car in a shop that, doesn't use, computerized tools to talk to your car. So
Yeah,
why would it be any different?
That's actually a really good analogy. As we always say, healthy mom, healthy baby. We just have to figure the best path to get there. You mentioned something about the third step of your journey and your business in terms of monetization. And again, I'm unfamiliar with having, the state pay for all medical care. That's just an absolutely foreign, piece of information to me here in the US. How does your company monetize it? Is it all through state-funded funds, or is there any private pay at all?
So unfortunately, fertility in the US is mostly out of pocket. There's very little insurance coverage. Today, there's more of a trend for employer benefits that would cover some, but basically it's out of pocket. So the spending decisions are made by the patients themselves without having to worry whether it's covered or not, because it's not, unfortunately. Okay, so the monetization model is we charge clinics on a per cycle basis. They decide how they want to market, charge. Some would charge patients for an add-on. Some would bake it into the base price and say, all cycles in our clinic use the best, technology out there. So if you want to, get your treatment in our clinic, then there's a payment. And some would say, no, it's our own tool of, being able to improve the standard of care. We're not going to charge for it, and they treat it as an expense. Either way, we get paid on a per cycle basis. And what I mentioned we do today is just one first step in developing a much, much more comprehensive platform that addresses egg quality, sperm quality, automated stimulation protocol generation, best transfer timing determination based on uterus lining. All of these things at the end of the day are things that these are practices that have been the same for the past 40 years.
Yeah.
It's all based on physicians and embryologists' experience. It's very qualitative and not quantitative, and it definitely is not standardized. So establishing this kind of golden standard of care based on, data and data insights and digitization is where we're aiming, Chloe to expand to. So Chloe today is Chloe EQ, which stands for embryo quality. There's different Chloes. Some of them are already in proof of concept. Some will be developed in the future that will expand Chloe's reach into more areas of the IVF
Amazing.
journey.
Well, you just stole my last question, which is what's down the pipeline. So now we know, and we will be watching carefully.
Please do.
To see how Chloe is doing. And this is incredibly exciting. I'm glad doctors aren't going to be replaced, but rather will be really helped out with this type of AI. So thank you so much.
It will make
for
them
joining.
better. It will make all of us better.
A pleasure to speak.
Same here. Thank you so much, Alyssa and Rachel.
Thank you so much, especially for taking time on the weekend. And as Alyssa said, we will be watching, cheering you on, because this really sounds like it will help patients, physicians, and ultimately families.
Super. Thank you for
Thanks.
having me.
Have a great
Bye-bye.
day.
Don't forget, subscribe to our podcast at businessofthev.com for the latest trends and trendsetters in women's health and business.